Who knows about Juneteenth? This is supposed to be the year or the time that Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, freed the slaves. It was called an emancipation. This emancipation is the same as an executive order. And this emancipation was to free the slaves. It was in no way, fashion, or shape supposed to oppress, send slaves back in any type of slavery, whether it was through military force or any acts against the people from the government. We're going to see how this emancipation played out through history and how it affects us today. Many of us celebrate Juneteenth and we don't really know what we're celebrating. Are we really free in America? Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 7 says, "Surely oppression makes a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart." So the year that this emancipation took place was 1865. This first image that we're going to look at, it states, by the end of 1845, when Texas joined the United States, the states was home to at least 30,000 enslaved people. After statehood in Alabama and Texas, slavery grew even more rapidly. Our slavery is being compared to Egypt while we're in America. Exodus chapter 1 verse 14. "And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor." That's the same thing that we dealt with here in America. It goes on to say, during the war, slavery in Texas was little affected, and prices for slaveries remained high until the last few months of the war. The number of slaves in the states increased dramatically. Slave prices inflated rapidly as the institution expanded in Texas. The average price of a slave, regardless of age, sex, or condition, rose from approximately $400 in 1850 to nearly $800 by 1860. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and 41 states, "They shall beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity." To explain what's going on between the Union and the Confederates, the Union wanted to get rid of the slaves. It wasn't just because Abraham Lincoln was this great president and he loved blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. It was because he wanted the Union to stay as a whole state. They have just won this victory against the British in the Revolutionary War, and that kept their slaves. Now it was tearing the states apart. So the plan was to free a certain amount of slaves to fight in the Civil War to win the war. They did this by popular persuasion. You had some slaves that were freed. You had some slaves that ran away or did good deeds great enough to earn their freedom. Well, this caused a lot of confusion here in America. And the South was not willing to give up their slaves without a fight. So we enlisted to fight, and this was prompted by Frederick Douglass. He was urging President Abraham Lincoln to not view the slaves as nothing and just cattle. He wanted the blacks to fight for their right to be free here in America. Slavery in Texas. This isn't make-believe. This is what we really went through in the times. This is a picture at the top, 1860, of Smith Company forced slave holding county in Texas. You see the slave master and his dog in front, with our people in the background, in the cotton field. When you go down to the left, you see us as freed slaves celebrating Juneteenth. End of year 1863, slavery. Abraham Lincoln's anti-slavery views were established. The Central Union War, aimed at first, was not to abolish slavery, but to preserve the United States as a nation. This wasn't to free the blacks and Hispanics and Native Americans from our hard bondage. This was to save the white man's world. That's what it's saying. Abolition became a goal only later due to military necessity. Growing anti-slavery sentiment in the North and the self-emancipation of many people who fled enslavement as Union troops swept through the South. So people were running away from slavery into the free states. That's why it's prompting him to go ahead and listen to Frederick Douglass, who met with him to say, hey, listen, we will earn our right for this emancipation. We will fight in the war and help you fight if you free us. Well, if you free some of the slaves, what's going to happen is you're going to have to free all the slaves. They didn't want that, and they were willing to fight for it. So by September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln had issued an initial Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. And he made it official that slaves within the state or designated parts of a state in rebellion shall be thenceforward and forever free. This is what we think that we're celebrating Juneteenth. That he emancipated us, that he freed us, but that didn't make us citizens, and this nation didn't keep its promises as far as oppressing us and taking away our freedom by means of law, because they weren't supposed to do that according to this document. By freeing some 3 million enslaved people in the rebellion states, the Emancipation Proclamation deprived the Confederates of the bulk of its labor forces and put international public opinion strongly on the side of the Union. So this was a political battle to get the hearts and the mind to say, hey, listen, if we do what Frederick Douglass is saying to do, then we're going to win the war and free the slaves. But again, this wasn't just because they thought that we were great people or that they thought that we were going to make a difference. It was still about preserving their state. Deuteronomy 28:48 says, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger, in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. Well, at this point, we are destroyed. And the emancipation happened. The Confederates lost that war. Now let's look at years after the emancipation. January 1st, 1863 is the year that this emancipation was put out. More than 2.5 years after Abraham Lincoln issued the emancipation on January 1st, 1863, 250,000 enslaved Negroes in Texas were already freed, but no one was in a rush to tell them. They weren't aware of it until this man, General Granger, landed in Texas. We didn't find out that we were freed by this emancipation until after 2 years later, June 19th, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger landed at Galveston and issued a proclamation that declared slaves in Texas to be free 2 years after Congress already passed what President Abraham Lincoln signed on this emancipation. Now let's see how things are going with this newfound freedom that the white man has given us. Is he going to hold his word? Is he going to keep his promises that he wrote on paper? Or has he ever done that? Have we ever seen that in history? Because after the war, after the Civil War, was the Reconstruction era. to where we built ourselves up. They always tell us to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, when the Civil War was over and we were freed, we did just that. But they came with something else. So on the right of this next picture, you see crowds of people riding through town showing their copies of the Emancipation Proclamation that they're free. We're celebrating at this point because we just found out that we're free. And it took the Union General to tell us almost 2.5 years later. Now to the left of it, we see a group of formerly enslaved people at a county almshouse, and you see how worn and torn our people are. Just below it, you see the withered hands of Henry Brooke, a formerly enslaved man from Greene County, Georgia, 1941. Now look at this monument on this next piece to the right of it. It's a rare October 1860 illustration printed in Cincinnati Gazette. It reads, "Patience on a Monument." The illustration by Thomas Nast shows a freed man sitting atop a monument that lists evils perpetrated against black people. A dead woman and a child lay at the bottom of the monument while violence and fire rages in the background. So in this picture, you see this man sitting atop of it, and it's supposed to be a celebratory moment for our people. We actually won the war. We got our freedom. But Esau is not happy about our freedom. They're still killing us. In this time, it's 1868. 3 years after we found out that we've been freed. After we got home from fighting these wars, we were still niggas to them and less than people. Now they hit us with black codes and Jim Crow. And we think this next scripture is just a physical thing. But they did this to our souls and in our minds to make us feel like we're less than them, less than a people. Deuteronomy 28:66 reads, "And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have no assurance of thy life." That's what these laws that they were putting on us are doing to our spirit. Here in this next image is a real newspaper article printed September 5th, 1868. And what it shows is their populism. What you see in the middle is the president, left wing and right wing. And at the bottom, you see their position on the African American man. This is after they so-called freed us. Isaiah 51:23 says, "But I will put it in the hand of them that afflict thee, which have said to thy soul, bow down, that we may go over. And thou hast laid thy body as the ground, and as the street to them that went over." In his hand, you can see the American flag. Cut out of that picture is his other hand reaching for the ballot box. They don't want us to be equal. They don't want us a part of their system. This is even after they freed us. Now looking at more things that they perpetuated against our people. It's called sharecropping. It started in 1870 all the way to 1950. Now sharecropping, without their own land, freed African Americans couldn't grow their own crops. They couldn't sell or feed their families. Therefore, out of economic hardship, many were forced to become sharecroppers. Therefore, out of economic hardship, many were forced to become sharecroppers. Sharecroppers often enter into a contract agreement with their former slave owners, to which they were assigned few acres along with seed and tools. This agricultural system embodied the cycle of poverty against our ancestors. Sharecropping today would be like being an employee. Here your boss or your employer gives you all the supplies that you need to start work. But then when they give you your check, they take taxes out. You gotta pay a water bill, light bill, gas bill. You gotta pay for your car. You gotta pay for the gas for that car. And then after that, you don't even have food to provide for yourself. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 33. "The fruit of thy land and all thy labor shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed always." That's still happening to today. That's what's going on with our ancestors during sharecropping. Sharecropping is slavery by another name. Unfair and dishonest practices and expectations from landowners kept sharecroppers in a vicious cycle of debt. When trying to settle debts, sharecroppers would oftentimes still owe the landowners for food, for clothing, for farming, equipment, and crops. And sharecroppers then became tied to one plantation, having to work until his debts were paid. Now, those unfair acts were that they couldn't afford these supplies anyway. It was a trap to get them back into slavery. And that's what happened to our ancestors. Redlining is the next thing that they placed on our people. This started in 1934 to present. Today we call it gentrification. And what this is government enforced racial discrimination based on predatory residential and financial lending practices. The abuses employed by the United States government blatantly preferred giving white homeowners precedence over well-to-do blacks. When blacks were given loans, they were subject to incredibly high interest rates and fees. In the TV series Them, it was a black family that moved from North Carolina to California. And when they bought their house, you had this meeting going on with the company that told the lady that was selling them the house that they're going to upcharge them on interest and all of this payment. Meanwhile, their counterparts that already live in there, the Caucasian counterparts that live there, they weren't subject to these same things. And we're still going through those things today, to where they're redlining us and moving the lines of the cities to benefit them and create hoods, slums, and ghettos. Now let's look at this next struggle that we had in America. It's called segregation. Segregation started in 1849 through 1950. And we hear this and think that it's a bad thing, but it wasn't. We had thriving black towns, not just here in Oklahoma with Black Wall Street, but throughout the United States during this segregation period. But what did whites do? What did Esau, the Caucasian race, do to our well-to-do black towns? Well, here in Tulsa, they firebombed it from the sky. They stopped us from collecting the insurance, and many of us had to flee to many different states to get away from the terrors that they committed against us. The violence and the murders, going back to the monument, to where you seeing nothing but evils perpetuated against our people. In New York, they built a park over a black town. In Georgia, Lake Lanier used to be a thriving black town as well, but they drowned us. Desegregation brought more tumults from America. Regarded many as second-class citizens, blacks were separated from whites by law and by private action in transportation, public accommodation, recreational facilities, prisons, armed forces, and schools in both northern and southern states. Segregation and desegregation brought a whole nother battle to America. It rose up another spirit in our people to fight once again, because this fight was already initiated as soon as that Emancipation Proclamation went into decree. It went from Frederick Douglass all the way to the leaders that we know today. The Civil Rights era started 1954 to 1968. This pushed us into a different fight due to segregation and desegregation. One of the most important periods in American history, which gave way to the rapid rise of sequential fall of major black figures such as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Kwame, Fred Hampton, Huey P. Newton, and others. So you had in Christianity a peaceful protest coming from Martin Luther King. Then you see with the Muslims, you had Malcolm X, which more of an ordered style of a protest. Then you had with Huey P. Newton, with the Black Panthers, you had more of a revolutionary fight, whether it was militant. You had others rise up in that same fashion to fight against the oppressions that America has laid so heavy on the Israelites. You had the head FBI director, John Edgar Hoover, who said that he didn't want to see a black messiah rise to fight against their oppressions. So what they did is they murdered all of our leaders. This killed our fight. During this fight for civil rights, blacks came together in never before seen display of unity and power to fight for their rights. This togetherness instilled a newfound pride in our identity as people. It is a good thing, and we do enjoy those freedoms today. We no longer have to sit at the back of the bus. We can enjoy freedom of speech, but as a consequence, it's getting harder for us to see who our true enemy is. This is another gift that destroyed the heart. We were desegregated, and now we believe that we can marry other nations, getting further away from the Most High God and being a set-apart people. We truly believe that we're free now. The chains are off, but we're still mentally captivated to this nation, and that's called Stockholm Syndrome. Now, Stockholm Syndrome has set in on our people. We really believe that this nation is going to stay true to their word. We believe that they give us a gift, that they're going to honor this gift in everything that they do. Stockholm Syndrome is the feeling of trust or affection felt in many cases of kidnapping or hostage taken by a victim towards a captor. Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 12 says the exact same thing. Wherefore thus saith the Holy One of Israel, because ye despise this word and trust in oppression and perverseness and stay thereon. This is where our people's mind is at. We really think that this nation is going to keep their words and treat us right. Now that they killed all of our leaders in the 60s, they had to get rid of the rest of the fight from our people. President Nixon used the war on drugs to do this. This is where you see the crack epidemic. The war on drug ravished our neighborhoods. It was put in the hands of thugs. Because at this time you had the Crips and the Bloods and the residue of the Black Panthers, and it killed all of that fight. Now that they put drugs and guns in our neighborhoods, now it's us killing us. It's us against us. And they can say that they have no part in the doings, but it was them that put the drugs and the guns in our neighborhoods. So about time we get to President Bill Clinton, which all black people love. He issues the 3-strike rule, and it was brought up by your president today, Biden. Now we're taking a look at modern day curses. How is all of those things from all the way back from 1865 through the 1900s, all the way up to the 2000s, how is affecting us to this date? Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 32 says, Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. You would think that this was talking about when we got off those slave ships and we was on the auction block. But this isn't the auction block, because what that 3-strike rule did was it put us in prison for life. So in Psalms chapter 83 and verse 3, it says, They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. The war on drugs was crafty counsel. And in that crafty counsel, they created the 3-strike rule. And this 3-strike rule imprisoned our people at higher rates. So now what we see with the modern day curses is that prison now is the new slavery. That's not just for the African Americans. That's for the Northern Kingdom, or what we know as the Hispanics as well. Because at the border, they're locking us up in cages and separating our children at the border from their parents. Kids that don't know where their parents are, or the parents don't know where their children are. What we've seen over the course of history is that the children of Israel suffer violence. Now we're going to get into police brutality. In Ezekiel chapter 35 and verse 5, it says, Because thou hast had perpetual hatred and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. Here we thought that the emancipation was supposed to end all of that. We were supposed to have our civil rights. We were supposed to be free. But it went from being taken captive by another people to being forced free labor and whipped, just to get into this time to be beaten by their batons, to be choked out, to be unjustly shot. They have had a continual hatred. They never wanted to see us free. They never wanted to make us citizens. Now here it is. We've seen what Juneteenth has given us. They've even made it a national holiday to where we get off of work and we get to celebrate this so-called freedom. But going through each piece of history and the struggles that we've had to go through, are we really free? Is this something that we really should be celebrating? In Luke chapter 1 and verse 71, Christ is going to be the only one that saves us. We've even had a black president. What did he do for our people? Was he able to save us? And all the other leaders before him, have they saved us? Deuteronomy 28 and 29 says, "And thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee." We've seen throughout history, leader after leader, after movement after movement. Even religion has not saved us. The only person that's going to save us is our black Messiah, the Christ. Luke chapter 1 verse 71 says that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us. Don't get confused. Don't let these gifts that our enemies have given us confuse us and blind us anymore. Christ is going to save us. Not religion, not Christianity, not a Muslim, not politics, not economics. Those things have not saved us. Only Christ will.
What is a nation? Nation is men leading by example. Nation is family. Nation is community. Nation is children with role models.